Have you ever noticed how the biggest shifts in life don't happen when you're strong, focused, and confident? But when you're tired in a way, sleep doesn't fix. Not dramatic exhaustion, just that quiet moment where you sit still and realize you don't have the energy to push anymore. No plans left to tweak, no mindset left to optimize. Just you, breathing. Inside a moment you can't force your way out of. I've been there. Maybe you have too. Everything looked fine on the outside, but nothing was moving. I kept telling myself to try harder, think smarter, stay positive. And the more I did, the heavier everything felt. Not because I was failing, but because something in me was fighting the moment I was already standing in. Then one day, not out of wisdom, but out of fatigue, I stopped. Not in a dramatic way. I didn't declare anything. I didn't let go with confidence. I just couldn't keep pushing. And strangely, that's when things began to shift. Not all at once, not with fireworks, just small, precise changes. A conversation that landed differently. A timing that suddenly made sense. It felt almost as if life had been waiting for me to stop arguing with it. Here's the part we rarely talk about. That moment doesn't feel hopeful. It doesn't feel powerful. It feels quiet, almost empty. But what if that quiet isn't failure? What if it's the first moment you're no longer interfering with something that's been trying to move all along? In that quiet, there's often a strange realization that creeps in. You weren't blocked because you lacked effort. You weren't stuck because you didn't want it badly enough. You were exhausted because you were trying to control something that doesn't respond to pressure. When you stop pushing, even briefly, the world doesn't collapse the way your mind expects it to. It softens. The noise drops just enough for you to notice what's already there. Think about how many times you've been told that progress requires force, that if you relax, you'll fall behind. So you stay tense. Even when nothing is moving, you keep your nervous system braced, waiting for the next thing to fix or improve. But in those moments when you finally loosen your grip, something subtle happens. You become more present. Not in a spiritual way, in a human way. Your breath slows, your attention sharpens, and without trying to, you begin to sense timing instead of chasing outcomes. This is usually the point where people say, "It was luck," or "It just worked out." But listen closely. These moments don't arrive when you're pushing life to give you answers. They arrive when you stop interrupting the conversation that's already happening. It's as if reality speaks in a lower voice than your effort. And you can only hear it when the internal argument pauses. If this feels familiar, it's not because you're imagining things. It's because there's a different way reality responds, and you've touched it before. Even if you didn't have words for it. Most of us were never taught to sense reality. We were taught to manage it. From early on, we learned that nothing really moves unless we push it in the right direction. If you want progress, you apply effort. If you want certainty, you plan. If something isn't working, you assume the answer is to think harder. Try again, or add more control. Over time, this becomes so normal that we stop questioning it. Life starts to feel like an empty space, waiting for us to fill it with decisions, strategies, and constant action. But that belief carries a quiet weight. It suggests that if nothing is happening, you're doing something wrong. That rest is risky. That pauses mean you're falling behind. So even when you're tired, you stay tense. Even when you don't know what to do next, you keep yourself in motion, just to avoid the feeling of stillness. The problem is, This kind of movement isn't always progress. Often, it's just noise. Think about how this shows up in everyday life. You might be working on a project that isn't going anywhere. You keep revising it, adjusting details, adding new ideas, but nothing clicks. The more you try to fix it, the more confused it becomes. Then one evening, you step away. Not to be productive, but because you genuinely can't look at it anymore. The next morning, without forcing it, the right direction feels obvious. You didn't create clarity by pushing harder. You found it by letting the system settle. Or think about relationships. How often do conversations improve when you stop trying to say the perfect thing? When you stop rehearsing your words and just listen. Something shifts. The tone changes. The tension drops. You didn't manufacture connection. You tuned into what was already there. This is the part we're rarely shown. Reality isn't always asking to be controlled. Often, it's asking to be noticed. It's already in motion, already carrying signals about timing, direction, and readiness. But when you approach life assuming it's empty until you act, you miss those signals. You end up working against a current you don't even realize exists. Imagine walking into a room where people have been talking for a while. You don't announce yourself by shouting or forcing the conversation to stop. You sense the mood. You adjust your volume. You pick up the rhythm before you speak. Life works the same way. It doesn't begin when you arrive. It continues, and you enter it. When you start to see this, the pressure to constantly invent yourself begins to loosen. You're no longer trying to paint a life onto a blank canvas. You're learning how to read what's already unfolding and place yourself inside it. And that subtle shift from forcing to tuning is where everything else in this conversation begins. Let me tell you a story that might feel uncomfortably familiar. I'll call him Daniel not because the name matters, but because the experience does. Daniel was intelligent, disciplined, and deeply committed to doing things right. On paper, his life looked solid. He planned carefully, worked consistently, and rarely left anything to chance. Yet inside, there was a quiet frustration he couldn't name, no matter how much effort he applied. Life seemed to respond late, weakly, or not at all. At one point, Daniel decided the problem must be clarity. So he doubled down. He mapped out his goals in detail. 5-year plans, backup plans for the backup plans. He tracked habits, optimized his mornings, and analyzed every decision. But instead of feeling more aligned, his body tightened. His sleep became shallow. He felt like he was constantly bracing for something to go wrong. Still, he told himself this was just the cost of progress. Then something small happened. A project he had been pushing for months stalled completely. Not failed, just paused. Emails stopped coming back. Decisions were delayed. The harder he tried to revive it, the more resistance he felt. One evening, exhausted, he closed his laptop earlier than usual, not as a strategy, just because he had nothing left. He sat there, doing nothing productive. And for the first time in a long while, he noticed how tense his body had been. His jaw unclenched. His breathing slowed. A few days later, an unexpected conversation changed the direction of that project entirely. Someone mentioned an angle Daniel hadn't considered. Not because it was smarter, but because it fit the situation better. Looking back, he realized something uncomfortable. That solution couldn't have appeared while he was forcing his original plan. He was too busy broadcasting certainty to hear feedback. This is where the realization begins. Daniel didn't lack discipline or intelligence. He lacked tuning. He was acting as if reality needed to be instructed, rather than engaged. He assumed nothing moved unless he pushed it. So he stayed in a constant state of internal pressure. And that pressure leaked into everything: his decisions, his timing, his relationships. Think about the last time you walked into a room where a conversation was already happening. You didn't try to dominate it immediately. You sensed the tone. You adjusted your energy. You listened before you spoke. You tuned yourself to what was already in motion. Daniel had never learned to do that with life. He treated every situation like a blank page that needed his control. Once he saw this, something shifted, not dramatically, but clearly. He stopped asking, "How do I make this work?" and started asking, "What is already happening here?" That question changed how he listened, how he spoke, and how he acted. Decisions became simpler, not easier, but cleaner. There was less internal argument, less need to justify every move. The most surprising part, things didn't slow down. They began to move with less friction, not because he cared less, but because he stopped interfering with the feedback loop. Daniel realized that many of the moments he once called luck were actually moments when he had temporarily stopped fighting the current. And once you see that, it's hard to unsee. This is where the conversation often splits. Some people call what we're talking about intuition or spirituality. Others dismiss it as coincidence or psychology. But beneath the language, both sides are pointing to the same mechanism. Not belief, not luck, but coherence. In physics, a system is simply a set of interacting parts. And one of the most basic principles across disciplines is this: when those parts move in alignment, energy flows efficiently. When they pull against each other, energy leaks, noise increases, signals degrade. Engineers see this in electrical circuits. Physicists see it in wave systems. Biologists see it in how cells coordinate and communicate. Alignment stabilizes systems. Misalignment creates interference. You don't need mysticism to understand this. Anyone who has ever tuned a radio has felt the difference. Static isn't the absence of a station. It's the presence of too many competing frequencies at once. Turning the dial harder doesn't solve that. Precision does. The signal becomes clear not because you forced it to appear, but because the receiver finally matched the frequency that was already broadcasting. Your inner world operates in the same way. Thoughts, emotions, and bodily signals are not separate processes. They're coupled systems, constantly exchanging information. When they're synchronized, the output is stable. When they're not, the output is noisy. You might say you want change. But if your nervous system is preparing for disappointment, the dominant signal isn't your words, it's your state. And noisy systems don't transmit clean information, no matter how much energy you pour into them. This is why forcing outcomes feels so exhausting. Effort isn't always strength. Often, it's evidence of internal disagreement. One part of you wants the result, another part doubts it. Another part doesn't feel safe receiving it. The body senses this immediately and shifts into protection. Tight shoulders, shallow breath, constant urgency. A system in protection mode doesn't explore new possibilities. It preserves familiar ones. When people hear the phrase quantum field, they often imagine something abstract or mystical. But in physics, a field is simply a space of interaction. It describes how information and influence are distributed, how systems affect each other without direct contact. Fields don't respond to force the way machines do. Machines reward pressure. Push the button harder, and something happens. Fields respond to pattern, to structure, to coherence over time. In wave physics, this is well understood. A coherent wave doesn't need to be loud to be effective. It needs to be ordered. When a signal is fragmented or unstable, it loses energy quickly. When it's coherent, even at low intensity, it carries further with less loss. The field doesn't care how much effort went into producing the signal. It only reflects how readable it is. Applied to human systems, this means the external response changes when your internal signals stop competing. When what you think, what you feel, and how you act begin pointing in the same direction. The signal stabilizes, not louder, clearer. Reality doesn't suddenly favor you. It simply stops receiving mixed information. Logic still has an important role here, but it's often given the wrong job. The logical mind is excellent at measuring, organizing, and predicting. It keeps you safe. It helps you plan. But it was never designed to steer something fluid. Trying to control reality using logic alone is like gripping water in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it escapes. Logic works best when it supports alignment, not when it overrides it. The field doesn't move when you argue with it. It moves when you resonate with it. And resonance isn't blind faith. It's internal consistency. When your system becomes coherent, even quietly, reality begins to respond. Not dramatically, not magically, but with a precision that's hard to ignore once you know what you're looking for. Now let's bring this out of theory and into something you can actually feel. Not something to believe, not something to repeat, just something to notice. Because coherence isn't an idea you adopt. It's a state your body already knows how to enter. Here's a simple place to start. Think about a decision you've made recently that felt forced, not necessarily wrong, just heavy. You probably knew what you should do, but something in you resisted. When you recall it now, notice what happens in your body. Does your jaw tighten? Does your breath get shorter? Do your shoulders lift slightly, as if preparing for impact? That physical response is information. It's your nervous system signaling misalignment, not failure. Now contrast that with a different decision. One that may have scared you, but felt oddly steady underneath. The outcome wasn't guaranteed. The fear didn't disappear, but there was a quiet sense of, this is next. When you remember that moment, your body likely responds differently. Breath deepens, muscles soften. There's less internal debate. That sensation isn't confidence. It's coherence. Many people confuse coherence with waiting. They imagine alignment means doing nothing, pausing indefinitely, or withdrawing from action. But tuning is active. Think about adjusting a radio. You don't smash it. You don't abandon it. You listen closely. You move the dial slowly. You respond to feedback. Static tells you something. Silence tells you something else. You stay present with the signal instead of demanding it perform on command. Here's where honesty matters. A lot of internal noise comes from saying you want one thing while emotionally preparing for another. You say you want change, but you rehearse disappointment. You say you want peace, but you keep your nervous system on alert. The field doesn't judge this. It simply reflects the strongest signal. And the strongest signal is almost never your words. It's your state. So instead of asking, how do I get what I want? Try a quieter question. What state am I practicing right now? Not once, not occasionally, but consistently. Are you practicing urgency? Are you practicing hesitation? Are you practicing clarity? These states shape your signal far more than any technique. there's also a subtle trap to watch for. Sometimes the mind adopts the language of alignment while still trying to control everything. It uses softer words to justify the same old tension. I'm surrendering, but the body is braced. I trust the process, but the breath is shallow. If nothing is shifting, instead of assuming something is wrong, check whether you're actually listening or just broadcasting louder. One of the clearest indicators of coherence is how your body responds when you imagine the future you want. Not the image itself, but the sensation. Does your system rush? Does it tighten, or does it slow you down, even slightly? That response tells you more than any affirmation ever could. As you begin to tune this way, something subtle happens. You become less obsessed with outcomes and more attentive to states. You stop forcing clarity and start noticing it. Actions get smaller but cleaner. You don't need dramatic motivation. You choose what you can actually sustain. And without realizing it, you begin behaving like someone who expects reality to respond, not because you're certain of the result, but because your system is no longer contradicting itself. That shift is quiet, almost invisible, but it changes the posture from which you move. And once that posture changes, the next realization becomes unavoidable. Why trying to control this system with logic alone keeps pulling you out of tune instead of bringing you closer? If there's one thing to take with you from this, let it be this: you were never meant to force reality into shape. You were meant to meet it in a state it can actually respond to. Nothing here requires you to believe in something new, adopt a philosophy, or convince yourself of anything. It only asks for a different relationship with how you show up, especially in ordinary moments when no one is watching. You are not behind. You are not broken. And you are not starting from nothing. You're already inside a system that's been responding to you the entire time. The moments you called resistance were feedback. The delays you took personally were information. They weren't signs that you were failing. They were signals showing where your system was still divided. As coherence grows, something changes in how you relate to outcomes. You stop chasing signs and start noticing responses. Not dramatic ones, subtle ones. Timing that feels cleaner. Conversations that move without force. Decisions that don't require constant reassurance. You begin to trust the feedback loop itself. You act, you observe, and you adjust. That's how systems learn. That's how alignment deepens. This is also where patience gets redefined. It's no longer waiting passively for something to happen. It's staying steady while movement organizes. You're not standing in front of life asking for proof. You're participating in it, responding in real time. That shift alone changes the signal you send. You may notice moments where nothing seems to be happening, even as you feel more grounded inside. That's not stagnation. That's stabilization. Systems don't reorganize while they're under constant pressure. They reorganize when there's enough coherence to support a new pattern. Trust that quiet phase. It's not empty. It's structural. If this message resonated, don't rush to turn it into a strategy. Let it settle. Notice how your body responds over the next few days when you make decisions. Have conversations, or imagine what's next. Pay attention to where you're forcing and where you're tuning. That awareness alone is already a shift. And if you want to continue this exploration, choose one of the videos on your screen. Watch it slowly. Not to get more answers, but to deepen your sense of how coherence actually feels when it's lived. Not thought. That choice is a signal too.